Yeah.
Sorry, I gotta get my thoughts straight here. So, I'm actually glad there's a big crowd and a lot of people who haven't heard this from me before. Normally I'm used to talking to Pu'uvai and they've all heard the same thing 100 times over. So some of you guys have heard the same thing 100 times over. But yeah, thanks guys for coming. So the way that I talk about stroke, I generally sort of break it up into at least two sections. One section, which is the part that I call sort of like the indisputables. I have like a list of 7 things that I think are pretty rock solid. Everybody can just do them. And then there's the part that's debatable and sort of always changing, and that's how we transfer our energy to the canoe to make it move. And that's going to change depending on what you're doing in the canoe, what your stroke is, who your coach is. And that's the part that we all will argue about and talk about for the rest of our lives. So I'm going to talk about sort of the indisputables first, and then I'll move into the second section. So the number one, by far, most important thing is the catch. And if any of you guys have ever heard me talk before, I've spent half the time talking about the catch. And this is the one thing that you can look at a paddler and tell where they're going to be, in a field of one-man paddlers, just based on their catch. Everything else can be pretty terrible. Like for me, I actually have, I think, a pretty terrible stroke, but I have a good catch. And it makes all the difference. And I think we've all heard about the catch or talked about the catch in some fashion before, but I'm going to go over it again. Basically, it's just ensuring that you're moving the canoe past the paddle and not the paddle past the canoe. Right, and I talk about it like you're riding a skateboard and you're kicking this foot and this foot's on the skateboard. It's making sure that this isn't slipping over the ground, right? You're getting a good bite with this foot so you can move the skateboard forward. And it's exactly the same with just, taking a normal step. If we didn't get a good bite with this foot and tried to pull back, right, it wouldn't work. So it's all about getting that locked in step and then taking the next step. So to do that in a canoe is harder than taking a step. It's making sure that we're fully submerging our blade at one point in the water, right? And what most people do, and almost always anybody who's been paddling for a while, if I sit down in a canoe with them and try to get them to get a good catch, the first thing that they want to do the instant that they touch the water is start pulling back already, right? So if I'm holding their blade like this, literally they just touch the water and it's like an instinct to pull back. Whereas we need to ensure that we're fully submerging our blade before we initiate our pull. And so in a stationary canoe, it's pretty obvious how that happens, right? You're sitting here, the boat's not moving. You're hitting one point in the water here, and then you're fully submerging at that one point in the water. Does that make sense? So this is going in on that angle if the boat's not moving. As the boat starts to move, it changes a little bit, right? Because we're now heading towards that point. So if this is my one point in the water, this little thing on the ground, right? We're heading towards it. So my angle is going to change a little bit, right? So I'm making contact with the water here, and then fully submerging there, and then pulling through. So in a one-man, most people's full submersion is right around their feet at all times. So if you're just sitting there in the one-man, again, not moving, you're gonna hit the water here and full submerge there. But again, when the boat's moving, you're gonna hit the water here and still full submerge there. Does that make sense? Because that point is moving towards us. So the most important change, I think, for a lot of paddlers is to initiate that entry by dropping their bottom shoulder into the catch, right? It's not just hitting here and then pulling with this shoulder not moving, right? If this shoulder is like the center of a clock, or this is my clock arm, then I'm going to cavitate without a doubt, right? If this shoulder doesn't move, if I'm hitting, I'm pulling, I'm full submerging here, and then my stroke's back here. The difference is we have to get this shoulder forward into that catch and then pull through. And so after I go over the rest of the stroke, we'll go stand in the mud here, and you can do it standing up just as well as you can in a canoe, right? Just stand there and practice getting that blade buried and pulling back without any cavitation. And by cavitation, we all should know what it means. It means I learned that word actually right here when I was 16. Coach Lucky used to talk about cavitation all the time. He was the first person. But just a turbulence around the blade. So if you are slipping on your catch, you're going to see two little whirlpools form right here. And as you bury your blade, those whirlpools are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and just turn into a big sucking sound, right? And that's what we call slippage or cavitation. So the point is, and you can do it even when you're standing there, get that thing locked in totally silently and then move it back. And if you take one thing out of that, it's that most people don't have a good catch. Go stand in the water and work on that catch for hours. Go into one man and work on it. And for all of us, for me, you know, I'm still, every so often you slip on your catch and you just adjust your stroke accordingly, right? I'm taking a stroke, I slipped on it, it means I didn't get it fully submerged, so I know the next stroke, automatically I gotta get that shoulder a little bit lower in the catch. Make sense? So that's number one, by far the biggest thing. I would say the second most important is how we're transferring that energy into the stroke, which I'm gonna go over after. So I'm gonna go sort of through my list of smaller things before I go to my next big. So the smaller things, and there might be teeny coachable variations to this, but I think for the most part, these are all pretty locked in stone, is going to be extended top arm at all times with no change in bend ever, right? So you don't want to do this to that, right? We just want maybe a 5-degree bend in here, extended, relaxed elbow that never changes, right? So here's our top band all day long. Number two would be focusing on making sure that you don't have this elbow rotation, which a lot of people have, right? So even if you're extended, a lot of people are doing this to that, right? That to that. And if you just sit here and do this 10 times, you can feel your rotator cuff already starting to fatigue, right? So get rid of any elbow bend. This elbow should be angling, you know, if you made a point off of it, it's a slight angle downwards, right? It's not like that, it's like that. And then a relaxed top wrist, basically at all times. Right, as we do that, you clench your forearm. If your forearm's given a race, right, then your whole stroke starts to fail. So relax your wrist, relaxes your forearm, allows you to engage your lat a little bit better. Right, so top arm is like this, basically at all times, till the end of the stroke. Okay. Make sense so far? Next would be just making sure that you're perpendicular to the water. Right, so if this is the water, my blade is perpendicular. Most people, especially on a one-man, especially on the right side, are going to be paddling kind of like this, right, because of their balance. So super important to, you know, in a one-man, work on your balance so that you feel comfortable doing that, leaning out onto it, you know, be comfortable. And it's why being able to catch yourself or fly the Alma is so important, so that you can do this without fear of bullying, right? On your recovery, if you're paddling properly, your Alma is going to come up pretty often, right? The little thing catches it, it's going to come up. You should just be able to, on instinct, to catch it, so you can go right back to your perpendicular stroke. The key to the perpendicular is making sure that this arm is right up by your head. So for me, if I turn my big nose, it hits my bicep. Those of you with smaller noses might not hit your bicep, but it's still going to be right there. Your top arm height is going to vary depending on, you know, what size paddle you're using. So I've seen lots of good paddlers with a top hand height initiating here, lots of good paddlers with a top hand height here, but it's going to be somewhere, you know, no higher probably than your forehead, no lower than your chin. And then, you know, that's where it is on your setup. Into your catch, your top arm is gonna drop a little bit, right? Until your full submersion point, for the most part, you're gonna be below your chin when your blade is fully submerged. Make sense? And then on the recovery, right, this is, by now everybody I'm sure is doing this, but making sure that you're rotating your wrists inwards while the blade is still in the water, right? So we're coming back here, rotating this in, we'll push the blade out the side, dropping this so that we can recover sort of with minimal body movement, right? If you're not rotating that wrist and dropping your top arm, then you're doing that. So we want to get rid of that and turn it into that. So now the energy transfer part, which is important and evolving. So I always talked about the stroke in terms of positive angle being from here to here, neutral being here, and then negative being here, right? And for the most part, when we're at positive, we're bringing the boat up. When we're pulling at negative, we're bringing the boat down. So in the past, I've used to talk a lot about maximizing the positive and minimizing the negative. that is evolving a bit and then now we just probably want to maximize the length of our total stroke. So it's like, you know, if you guys have run, and any running coach will say the easiest way to, you know, increase your running speed is to increase your running stride, right? It's the same with a little wheel spinning like this, or a big wheel spinning much slower like this, right? So we want to give ourselves a big wheel when we're paddling, and not necessarily a little wheel. So to do that, it means we have to go negative, right? So we're going here, and we're coming all the way out the back. So the way that we can go negative and maximize the length of our stroke without bringing our boat down is to have the stroke sort of be the same as I've always talked about before, maximizing our power up front, hitting our catch really hard, possibly accelerating through to this neutral point, right? When you're at neutral, you have the most surface area on your blade relative to the direction you're going, right? As we change these, we're losing a little bit of power relative to our direction. So we want to maximize our power probably right at neutral. And you know, it's like if you're hitting a tennis ball, you're making contact with the ball at neutral. And then the rest of the stroke is follow through, right? So before we used to talk about sort of maximizing that power and then basically getting the thing out, you know, pretty soon and shifting the whole stroke up the year. Now we're talking about maximizing power still in the front, but instead of rushing to get that thing out, we're okay maintaining contact all the way back. So see the difference? And then so all we're doing is backing off our power, letting our stroke follow through the back end, right? So we're making sure we're not accelerating out the back. If we accelerate out the back, then the boat's gonna start doing this, right? So you can have a really even boat with no downward drive coming all the way out the back. And then as far as our body and how we're transferring energy, so before with a real upfront stroke, for me, I know personally I can get the most hull speed if I'm just hitting the front super hard with rotating my upper body, right? So I used to coach a lot of this, rotating your hips, hit the front, push off your hip, and then get the thing out, right? And I would refer to it like if you're spinning a globe and you want to maximize the speed of that globe, or a basketball on your finger, if you guys know how, I don't know how to do that, but, and you want to maximize that speed, you're going to come down as hard as you can, you're going to hit it faster than it's moving, and then you're going to get off, right? So boom, 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 getting that thing as fast as it's going, and then lengthening it out, right? Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah, as far as, so in the point in this upfront stroke of exiting early was when we're accelerating the boat, you're hitting the water faster than the water is moving, and then by maintaining contact with the water, all you're doing is slowing it down, only for an acceleration stroke. So, right, if you're accelerating our globe, we're hitting the globe faster than it's moving, and then we're getting our finger off because we're accelerating. And then once it's up to speed and you're maintaining that speed, then you can come down, basically hitting it at the speed it's moving, and come off the back in a long stroke. Does that make sense? So it's the same thing in paddling. So for me, the part that's always been missing in my stroke and my coaching was how do we get back to this maintenance stroke, right? I knew how to accelerate the boat, and I knew how to coach to accelerate the boat, but I could never figure out how to get myself or anybody else to sort of then maintain that power. And so that's going from this sort of up front rotation, hitting the front, getting it out at neutral, to this long stroke. So and then the difference is just thinking about the stroke is staying basically the same for the front half. It's just that we're maintaining contact with the water through the back half. And instead, and this is the important part that is evolving, that I feel like we can argue about for the next 30 years, is instead of our power coming from this rotation, it's now coming from this, which is our hips are moving the boat forward, right? And that allows us to sort of do this really long stroke, and it's incredibly efficient. Once you figure out how to do it and you're engaging your core, then you can transfer to this long stroke in a really efficient manner. So the hip engagement, we're burying our blade here, we're leaning forward into it, burying our blade, and then pulling our hips. And it looks awkward when I'm standing because my body's, you know, if you're in a boat, the boat's moving under you. So then we're moving the boat under us. But if I'm just standing still, it looks like that, which is not really like that, right? Imagine my feet moving forward also, right? So this is why it's always been really hard for me to understand when other people were coaching it, because I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you don't sit in the boat and really do that. But then once you figured out, oh, you actually do sit at the boat and do this, right? Like this is the best way to explain it. It's just that motion. So if you're doing it right, you'll feel your abs hurting when you get out of the water. You know, then you're adding this entire, for us, all of, you know, my stroke used to be a lot of this. So it's all lower back and all lat, right? If we're bringing our body up like this, I'm using my lower back. Whereas if I'm bringing my abs forward, then I'm using my abs, right? So it almost can look the same when you're in the canoe, but you're switching from using lower back to using your core. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So then in practice, the way it's working, we're generating much less power from our rotation and much more power from this hip thrust. And then you're just wanting to make sure that you're finishing basically at square, right? Shoulder square. So you don't want to do that, right? Which almost sometimes can feel good to lean back a little bit into it. And if you guys watch, like, sometimes sprint kayakers in the Olympics, you know, when they cross the line, they do one last stroke, boom, and they shoot their boat over the line by falling back, right? That's the same idea as us, but we're not falling all the way back, right? We're coming to neutral. But when you're just first experimenting with it, I would actually recommend sort of just to feel what it feels like. You can come back, you know, a little bit beyond neutral, just to make sure, oh, that's how the engagement feels, you know. But then as you're working on it, make sure that you end up not doing that. You want to finish wholly square, straight upright.
What happens?
The other way to think about it, which Travis Grant uses this analogy all the time, is cross-country skiing, right? I've only done it once, so I'm not really sure, but lean forward, plant the poles, right, and then doing that, getting the thing past it. So that's the exact same motion. So then to put it all sort of together, and I'm still figuring this balance out, right? And especially like coaching the high school kids in doing a half-mile race, I'm not sure what the ideal stroke is going to be. I know you can develop a ton of hull speed by hitting the front and getting it out right at neutral, right? We're accelerating the boat, you can make that thing lift up and skip. And then how do you then transfer to the super efficient stroke? So when we're doing a long race, without a doubt, 98% of the time, we're going to be in our long efficient stroke. But if you're doing a regatta, you don't necessarily have to be as efficient, right? We're trying to maximize hull speed, not efficiency. So there's some, you know, this sort of rotating balance between these two strokes, which then, you know, it's up to you guys all to sort of figure out for your own crew what that balance is going to be. But what we are, for the most part, are doing is going one or two possibly short changes where we're calling sort of our level 4 like acceleration stroke, where we're hitting the front really hard, getting it out at neutral, right? So that means we're doing whacking this and literally getting it out before we get to here. So the whole stroke is in front. We're accelerating the boat. Once we accelerate the boat, we're switching what we're calling our sort of level 3, which would be like our maintenance, right back to our long stroke, right? So you're doing this, long, and then somebody calls it up, intensity change, up, right? And you come over, and then you go right back into your long, right, to maintain it. So it's the same in my mind. You're spinning that globe, you get that thing moving, and then you go back to your long, okay? And that's why I say, like, it's very gray, and you got to figure it out for your how to make it work for yourself. You know, I actually, I don't know. I haven't really been taking stroke very much. It's still going to be fast because even when we're doing the long stroke, now we're coming all the way out the back. You want to recover as quickly as you possibly can, right? So we're even with a long stroke, we can still be at like in the 70s because we're throwing our thing forward. And then when you go to your, you know, just whacking the front, you can be easily in the upper 70s. And that's again for like our shorter, I've been coaching high school, so our longest race is 4 miles. You know, in an adult race, you're going for an hour, your long stroker, it's going to be, you know, probably in the 60s. That's the 60s.
Okay, so Luke, let me just ask something, because when you coached us, we were really emphasizing our twist, to get not so much the power, but also to get up front, to get the big stroke for 3 and 4, like if you're in 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So would you still incorporate that twist?
For me, yeah. I mean, I've de-emphasized twist, and I'm only using it So we're leaning forward. You know, this shoulder has to travel. The more that this thing is moving, the more power you get out of your stroke, right? If I'm just doing this, I'm not getting much leverage out of my stroke. Whereas if this shoulder is moving, one, you're getting more leverage out of your body, you can get more hip engagement, and you're also maximizing the amount of time that you're at positive angle, right? So if I'm just doing this, positive here, neutral, negative, whereas if I'm moving my whole body, right, I'm positive, 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 neutral, negative, right? So we want to get this shoulder moving by pivoting forward. The twist for me is just enough basically to drop that bottom shoulder into our catch, right? Like, so we're still twisting just enough to get that blade fully submerged. And if you feel comfortable twisting more, you can, as long as your power predominantly is coming from this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But to go back 1 second to that fast recovery, like that's a really integral part of this, is making sure, so well, you know, we used to do a long stroke way back in the day, and we'd sort of float this recovery forward real slow, give ourselves time to breathe, and it felt really good. It still feels good. If you go on a boat and you go 45, really hard, and then really slow, that feels great, but the boat's not going all that fast, right? So we want to minimize the amount of time that we're in the air. So we're doing our big wheel, and we're throwing our recovery forward. You know, the way I've heard it described is if we're like throwing a kettlebell, right? We have this thing for getting it out. Wah. So I tell my kids a lot, you know, like, we'll do a drill where we just sit there, you know, we'll fall forward like this with no paddle in our arm, you know, and so just to get that feeling of like coming forward hard. Other questions?
How much leg power do you use?
So that's something that's also evolving. Like, I know for me, when I'm rotating, you know, doing the up front stroke, it's a ton of leg power, because a lot of that power, transferring the power from me to the boat is coming through my leg, through this hip, comes forward, and then it drives off, right? And the same as in a one-man. But then once we switch to the hip thrust, the power is coming from us to the boat, mainly through our connection with the seat, right? So we're doing this, and then we're bringing the seat forward. So it's much, I've found for me, it's much less leg engagement. But I'm still going between the two strokes a lot, right? So then I'll hit the front using the leg, and then I'll go back to the long. Yeah.
Is there a double press, like when you were doing the globe?
Yeah.
It's like you press up front and then you press again.
So it's sort of, you know, a lot of it's you're following through the back with his hips, right? So it's the core that's bringing you through the back of the stroke. So it's still loading up the front and then just following out the back, you know, while maintaining or backing off pressure, basically, right? So what you want to make sure that you're not doing, and which is super common anytime somebody goes to a long stroke, is to do this and then back. You know, like we're trying to maximize how we're coming out the back, so we're curling ourselves over the top and pulling, you know, and that's what's going to bring the boat way down. So instead of doing anything like that, and this is where I say I don't have a good stroke, because I'm a big cruncher, so you guys might know, but right, so to make sure that we're coming square at the end is super important to making that stroke work. And also, so, you know, Manute used to come and he would do the clinic here, and you would always just sort of like talk about, and like every Tahitian I've ever heard talks about this idea of like keeping the boat like moving laterally, right? There'll be like, you know, and they say like, oh, in Hawaii you guys do a lot of this, you know, whereas we want to do, and I always like never really understood what they were talking about. But once you start engaging that long stroke, it becomes so critical to do that, and that's the only way to describe it is that instead of that, you know, like, and it's the difference is that this is sort of a lateral movement, right? All of your power is going straight, and then this would be, you know, bringing your power like that. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure to answer her question, but I know that people that are stroking can feel if somebody behind them does what I'm not sure you're talking about, that they'll get the front and then there's a little pause and then they'll do it, so it feels like a double.
Yeah, so we don't want that at all, for
boom,
sure.
Boom, boom, and you can
Yeah.
feel it.
Yeah,
then
yeah,
there's
yeah.
that
I know,
surge.
yeah.
So what you're saying is that you're still going to enter, but your continual power all the way through, not a break in action.
Well, we're backing off our power for the most part after neutral, right? So we're gonna have a lot of power up here, and possibly accelerating to neutral, and then we're backing off. You know, but it's not going to zero power and just letting the boat take it. You know, we're just sort of, you know, our power, I feel like we're hitting hard, and then it might go a little harder to neutral, and then we're backing off. If that's
Okay,
like
so
draft.
no more of the bang it and let go.
Only when we want to accelerate the boat, right? So we still do that, and I still coach that for the kids when we want to accelerate. So we'll go bang, 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 1 or 2 maybe changes, get the hull speed up, and then once we're back to a maintenance, we're going long again. So and it's like riding a bike. If you're riding a bike and you want to accelerate that, you know, you can stand up on that bike and pound, 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 and then you get that speed up, and then you go back down and sit and maintain that speed. Way easier to maintain than to accelerate, right? Yeah.
One question is, when you're coming back and braking, you're paddling forward. You said start twisting in the water to release the pressure to come around, right?
Yeah.
Because I had somebody scold me about doing that. I'm just curious.
Oh, I mean, you can. I haven't seen a stroke, so it is possible. I just did a clinic with somebody. I told them to do that, and then they're like right past neutral, starting to rotate their blade already, you know. And I was like, no, not that. So it's like right at the end of the stroke.
Right.
This thing rotates, and all that rotation does is pops it out of the water. Like you can just feel that thing. You're getting some momentum from it out of the water, and then you throw yourself forward.
Easy release.
What is that? Yeah.
Easier release.
Yeah. Then to try and do that. But then building that momentum on your recovery is super critical, right? We're throwing ourselves forward, not just to have a fast recovery, but also to explode the front of our stroke, right? Whereas, like in kayaking, they call it like free energy when you're from the air to the water, right? We want to use that momentum to build up our speed. So from here, we're throwing ourselves forward so we can hit that catch really well and explode the front of the stroke. Make sense? Yeah.
Hey Luke,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I cut somebody off. Do you think that we've always talked about not going into the negative?
Yeah.
And they've always said don't go into the negative because all of a sudden all the work that we've done up front by the lift
Yeah.
and the acceleration and the power that we have in the up front stroke,
Yeah.
but as soon as we start to go back into the negative, we start to push the nose back down.
Yeah.
But you think that then, you know, everybody says, oh, the stroke is changing, and it's not really changing, it's evolving.
Yeah.
Just like the canoes evolve and the paddles evolve. You know how like sometimes like the angle on the blades, like all the old blades used to be straight.
Yeah.
Now they're getting more angle, and then they've almost, you know, gotten out like this, and then
Yeah.
they're coming back. So they're finding that sweet spot. So really neutral with your paddle is not straight up and down anymore because of the blades still at an angle. So you're still at a positive.
So I call neutral, actually neutral is, for me, is the blade.
He's the king.
The blade is
So
at
the
the
shaft is going to look low negative.
Right. So that's why it looks like we're going into the negative, maybe.
No, but we still are, because we're actually, so literally we're coming all the way out the back. So the stroke, so we're going to neutral.
So your blade is neutral,
So
which
yeah,
is
so
like
you're
this.
going to neutral, and then we're continuing literally like.
So it's almost like finishing a baseball swing.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
Your bat is, you've already
Watch out,
hit
Vic.
the ball, you've already gone through your power phase,
Yeah.
so now it's just basically finishing your swing.
Yeah,
You see
exactly,
a lot of
yeah.
baseball bats hitting the guys in the back of the
You're
bat.
gonna
It's
hit
just-
somebody, Vic, if you're not careful.
you're good.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same. It's like you wouldn't.
You're following
If you're playing tennis or baseball or golf, you don't
I've
hit the
been
ball,
doing
you
that.
get everything out, right? You get way more power if you hit the ball and swing all the way.
Follow through.
Yeah. So that's how it is. And so, like, you know, for me, the top hand is pretty indicative of whether somebody's doing this right. That top arm, which I used to not coach this at all, you know, everything used to be sort of keeping that top arm real high in front of your face, basically. Yeah. When you're doing a short up front stroke. But now that top arm for a long stroke is literally going to come
It's gonna have to come down.
all the way down right above the gun, right? Like,
Which
and
is
that's
gonna
how you
feel
can see
good.
when somebody's doing it right is when it's coming all the way down to the gun.
Can you talk about the placement of the blade and where it should be on the shaft if you've got a proper length and
Placement of your hand on the shaft.
Yeah,
so
the bottom.
where along the shaft, close in, and how to hold your bottom hand?
I mean, there's no rule really. Like here, is what we talk about. I always see videos of myself, especially like in a rudderless, and I'm like depressingly way out here, which is totally wrong. But like, I think we sort of naturally, and for me at least in a rudderless, will choke up to get more control out of the blade. And I'm used to it maybe from steering too. More control because you can kind of get that thing buried further out if you're a little bit higher up. But for the most part, you know, you want to be here.
But not down.
It's a bad, if you're using a slightly shorter paddle, then you could be gripping it all the way there. So it's just going to depend. And where you're sitting at the boat, right? Seat 1 is going to be, because seat 1 is lower to the water. So we generally use a shorter paddle in seat 1, 1 inch shorter than everywhere else. And then you could be gripping so
position
important. Like
for
when
this position.
so you would definitely want to be as close to the gunnel as you can without hitting it. And a lot of people are out here, one because their bottom hand is away from the gunnel and their top hand is down here. So it's getting the bottom hand to the gunnel and the top hand right over that.
So then the position on your bottom hand, if you're going in, what importance is that? Does that matter? As long as you get the blade in as the impact,
Yeah.
does it matter where your hand
Where
is?
your hand is here.
Yeah.
So like you can get your blade deeper by choking up for
Okay.
sure. So if you feel like you're slipping on the catch and can't figure out, because if I'm down here, it means that my body has to come all the way down here to get that full submersion. Whereas if I'm here, I just got to do that and get the full submersion, right? I don't got to come. And if you're standing in the water experimenting, just standing there, you can play with that and see, wow, what a difference. If I hold the blade here, I can get a beautiful catch, no problem. But, that's, get much leverage. So where's the good balance point for my body? And that's just going to adjust.
What about the power?
Oh wait, well, I'll come back to that in 1 second. The other thing is that for me it changes also depending on the speed of the boat. So with the boat's not moving at all, it's much harder to get a good catch. And for me, so I will choke up a little bit more to get the boat up to speed, so I can get a little more depth on the blade. And then as I'm moving, I can drop that down a little bit because you don't need because to get a good catch from a stationary boat, you got to be submerged like here. As the boat gets moving, then you're submerged right to the blade. Who was question then?
Power.
It was on the power. Is there any difference in the power if you choke up or down?
Yes, can I say something? There
Yeah.
absolutely is.
Yeah.
And Graham was in the boat, and I know he has a question, but when one of our guys was, I don't know if you remember this, but you won't get as much power.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so when we were paddling that one time, and I won't mention his name, he's not here now, but he's a really strong guy, and I go, hey, drop your hand a little bit. The minute he dropped his hand, we felt it. The boat just, everybody in the boat went, whoa.
Yeah.
It just, we could feel it. So you do.
Well, I mean, so yeah, I think at the highest you're here, at the lowest obviously you're there. So like anything outside of this range and you're significant, the higher I go here, I'm losing tons of leverage. So like for me, I don't know though, like between here and here, if that's gonna make a difference.
It was almost like a third up.
Yeah.
That's a little, okay, but Graham had a question.
Just kind of what Vic and the Boer were saying.
Yeah.
All I care about is catching waves. So
Yeah.
that's my life. I'm really finding sort of what you were saying. I get the catch, and I'm into the long stroke.
Yeah.
Lucky's my coach too.
Yeah.
And I'm finding like if not quite gonna make the bump, but when I do make it, it happens from here to here. And I'm doing a lot of the thing, moving the abdomen forward.
Yeah.
Travis was saying, it's like, if you didn't have a paddle and you're sitting on a skateboard, how would you move it forward?
Yeah.
You'd
Yeah.
go like that. But I'm finding like not here, but from here to here
Yeah.
is like that little bit. It's kind of like the second push you were talking about. That's what gets me in. Does that sound?
No, I
logical?
actually I've never really personally felt that. You look at the best OC wild surfer in Hawaii by far has always been Rod Tresnick, and his stroke, he comes way out the back. He would finish basically like this and down. So and it seemed like he was bringing himself in possibly by doing exactly what you're saying. A little bit of like what we're saying not to do at the end of the stroke. By doing that pull there, he was able to accelerate the boat downwards into the bump. And I feel like I've never been able to personally figure out how to make that work for myself. I can totally see if other people are making it work for them.
It has to do with my size.
And that's going to be in a one-man, right? Like in a six-man.
Oh yeah, totally one.
Yeah, you're not going to want it for sure.
So in a 6-man, you're not going to want to go into that negative with power.
No. We're still going to go negative. There's still going to be some power in there. I guess the difference that I was saying is like whether you're doing that, you could possibly do this in a one-man and make it work for you.
How about doing that with your body back? Same thing. You're still saying vertical. You're still using the abs.
Yeah.
But you're coming back a little farther.
Then that is going to be what you're doing in the 6-man too. It's just making sure you're not accelerating that too hard off the back.
Because the acceleration in the back drops the front.
The acceleration in the back, is going to be bringing the boat down.
So when you enter and you're up front there and you go through, you enter and you're submerged and you're expecting that the blade will stay submerged works all the way through
Yeah.
until a certain point here when you let go of the press already, and then you're just gently coming out so that there's no effect to the.
Yeah, so for what, like we're loading the front building power to here and then vacuum power off. So at neutral, right? So neutral is going to be right around your, past your knee or so. But then we're letting it come all the way back to here. So we're still doing that extra part just by backing off the power. And it's not a drop off in power, we're just backing the power off. That
So
makes sense.
the blade itself,
Yeah.
from the front to the back, it's going to be the same amount near the wall.
Yeah.
From the front to the back.
Also,
It's not
but-
going to go farther down
Yeah.
because like it's
Yeah, that should have been one of my indisputables, which is that if this is the surface of the water, the blade, in order to get that lateral movement, right, we need this blade to get all of its depth right at the beginning, and then straight through the water, which is going to allow us, it goes hand in hand sort of with this opening up at the end. Whereas if we're doing that, then the blade's going to do this, and we're driving down on it and doing that, right, doing a big U. So making sure everything being straight includes that. Yeah.
I worked with another coach who coached something very similar, and I can tell you, it's a lot harder. We did it, and it's like, oh my god, I'm exhausted. So is that same sort of thing?
Maybe. I mean, I think when figuring out the catch, getting a solid catch is going to make the stroke a lot harder, right? You can have a super not hard stroke if you're just looking at your catch. So you just get way more resistance out of a good catch. As far as the long stroke goes, for me, it's way more efficient. Like when I get tired, I gotta keep telling myself, go back to engaging my abs, right? And it just ends up more efficient for me. And part of it's because I used to put so much energy into getting that hull speed by whacking the front. So for me to not just try and do this, to try and do that, ends up increasing efficiency.
So you actually feel less tired.
I feel less tired. It doesn't sorry, I will feel like the same level of defeat every now and then.
So, hey Luke, let me ask you a question. When we started paddling with you, we all went to double bends, and so now when you're in a canoe and some people have straight blades and some people have double bends, how is that going to affect timing with the catch?
I think the timing can in and out of the water will be the same. The difference is like obviously the angle of your entry, right? The difference with our straight shaft is that your hand is sort of like that to get the same extension, which if people are used to it, they can do that. And then your neutral point is going to look pretty different. So I think it's almost more important than having the same blade shape in the boat is having the same, having a double bend.
Yeah.
And there's just like absolutely no reason not to
Have a double bend.
have a double bend, right? And because our whole thing is getting open as much as we can, the double bend allows you to get a really good grip at your full submersion instead of. Yeah.
I felt like I got a lot out of Travis's work. I mean, it was unreal. And he even said, like, to her thing about how you get more tired because you're trying something new. And he said he was slower for a year, and then he got faster than ever. I mean, that just proved it last year. His results were amazing. And I found that everything he said worked because I worked on it. And it seems like I would recommend, I don't know if you recommend, but if people get on their one-mans and practice it themselves, because when we get in a six-man, everyone's at a different place. And so as a steerer, you won't know if this guy, who's throwing it off because somebody might be working on their cat, somebody else on the, and it's all kind of, you got six people working on different things.
Yeah.
So I think it really helps to get on a one-man and practice whatever your issue is.
Yeah, for sure. Everything's better on one man as far as practicing. I mean, just because you don't got to pay attention to timing, you can do it on your own. But it's still like, if you're on a one man on your own without a coach, like it's super beneficial to have a coach alongside you and a six man saying, good job, 1 and 3, number 4, bring it back home, right? But you can't really have that in a one man.
So getting back to Lily, and how she was saying if your hand is close to the gunnel or your bottom, to me the top hand, if your top hand is correct and it stays like this and you don't collapse it, that's like almost the most important. Because once this top hand is in correct position, your blade will be and your bottom hand will just come down. A lot of stays.
Yeah.
It just drops down a bit,
Yeah.
but it stays above the button.
Yeah. And then one more thing with like that idea of the boat being going lateral movement, it like ends up forcing you can bury your blade and then bend your bottom arm, right? Like for the first decade of my life, I was always told, don't bend your bottom arm. So if you're not bending your bottom arm through your stroke, then you end up almost naturally having to go deeper and deeper and deeper through the stroke. Whereas what we want to do is ride everything straight like this, get all this full submersion, and then we're pulling sort of straight back along a rail, right? It's as if we're doing a seated cable row in the gym, right? We're pulling like that, straight along, letting that bottom arm bend. And not necessarily, you can pull from your bicep a bit at the end, but just to make sure it's not doing that. Vic,
How much are you emphasizing leg?
so less than before.
Less than. Are you still are you actually dropping like when you say dropping your lat and everything on your rotation? Are you actually dropping? You feeling like you're dropping your leg with your hips? You almost have to.
Yeah,
You're
you still are,
engaging.
but before the difference was we were focusing a lot on having this hip come forward.
This is
Right.
on your rotation.
Yeah, on the rotation, which is where all of our leg drive is coming from. This hip comes forward, and then we're pushing that hip back.
Not so much dropping like a leg into,
Yeah, we're still doing that too because we're coming forward on the seat. This knee has to bend.
and then you're using that to push off the
Yeah,
too.
yeah. But
For power.
you're pushing off the leg, which is moving that hip. So I'm still doing that at my up front stroke with my rotation. When I'm going back to the long, then these hips are basically stationary.
These two hips are
Because you're thrusting the boat.
more forward. Right?
So are we still sitting on the edge of our seat?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull all your old footage.
No, there's already not that.
I'm kidding you.
I mean, so for the most part, the front half of the stroke is staying the same. It's just adding,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to add the back half. And then, but figuring out this balance is key, right? And there's no perfect like formula for how to switch between the up front to the longer stroke, how to do it in a 6-man, what to do. So we call intensity changes when we're doing it. So we'll do hey is our long stroke, and we're doing this for the high school kids too. Hey, and then hop will be meaning bring it up to our sort of level 4, hitting the front, and we'll never do more than like 2, maybe 3 hops in a row. We're bringing it up, and then we'll always go change gears back to the hay. So the goal is to get the whole speed up, go back to a hay, maintain that whole speed with a long stroke. That's efficient. Yeah. Anything else?
And you'll do that also, like when you're gonna catch a bump, yeah. You're gonna apply. It seems like you're gonna go into that level 4, what you call.
So
So that you can grab that front or something.
sometimes if
Sometimes it's
you're
maybe just 2 or 3 strokes.
if you're like connecting,
Yeah.
you already have the whole speed,
Yeah.
and you're connecting to a bump for sure. Then I'll go up into whacking the front, pop, pop, pop.
Yeah, but I'm talking about on a 6-man.
And the 6-man too, if you're connecting, which we can, then you're gonna. But you have to have the whole speed. So you don't want to ever like not have the whole speed and then go into that stroke, right? It's not like an acceleration from 0, which a lot of times in a 1-man too, right? Like a wave might pass you by, your nose is kind of up, you feel the next one coming behind you, you're not moving very fast. You wouldn't want to start whacking the front. And in the 6-man too, that happens probably even more in a 6-man, right? You feel the nose go up, you know something big is coming. Then you want to get into it with a long stroke. That makes sense?
Just how it feels. Good.
Question? Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Sorry for being late here. Turned into that. We want to get rid of that, and this will happen even if I'm all the way to here, right? And then I pull. Just that extra 2 inches, it makes all the difference, right? So boom. And then real quick, you just want to think about then moving into it, right? So if this is my stationary, and if the boat's moving, I'm coming slowly towards that point, right? So I'm going to lose a little bit of angle as I get into it, but everything feels the same. So you